If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Marcus Body. Marcus is an expert in understanding the people who work for you and the people you want to work with. Marcus is a strategy lead at ThirtyThree, the global agency which manages and creates some of the world's most valuable employer brands. In his role, Marcus has been the key strategist on over 100 branding projects. Marcus, thank you for joining us today. Would you mind sharing a little bit of the backstory as to what led you to specialize in employer value propositions and employer branding?
Absolutely. I think like many people, this wasn't my plan. I didn't even know this job existed when I left university many years ago. But I guess I started working in the world of job advertising, and I gradually realized there were these people over in the corner of my agency who seemed to be doing a lot of the interesting thinking and kind of the bigger picture stuff. And eventually I asked, could I go and be one of them? And I've been doing it for about 15 years, ever since I had the bravery to stick my hand up and say that's the kind of thing I'd like to do.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. And how long have you been at ThirtyThree now?
This is actually my second stint at ThirtyThree. So I've been at ThirtyThree for a couple of years, but I'm a returner. I was previously here for another 5 years further back in my career. So
fabulous, fabulous. So, some members of our audience may not know the differences between talent brand, employer brand, and then you add in employee value proposition. Can you share a little bit of insight into each of these for us?
I will do my very best. I'm afraid it's one of those things where every expert and every consultant has their own version of the truth. And I think some of it's down to different countries kind of developing this at different points. So I think the employer brand came about a long time ago, sort of 25 years ago in the UK. We started talking about employer brands, and we were working with teams who called themselves recruitment teams. Whereas I think over your side of the ocean, in America, you had talent acquisition teams who then started talking about talent brands. I think they're basically the same thing. But you have some people who will go, oh no, this one's a little bit more internally focused and that's a bit more externally focused. But you're really talking about how are you going to communicate with the people who already work for you or the people you'd like to work for you? And that's the world we're in. Whether you're calling it talent branding or employer branding, that's what we're talking about. Employee value propositions are slightly different. That's kind of like the logical bit that sits behind it. And it's something that was stolen from consumer advertising. So when you were inventing a new product, like a new car, you'd write down the value proposition for that car. It might be all the good things you like about that car in return for your money. And really, it was taking that idea and applying it to employment, saying, hey, why don't we do that with employers the same way we do it with a car or a chocolate bar or a holiday destination? And so really, it's just, why should the people you want to work for you choose to work for you rather than anyone else? That's your value proposition.
Fabulous, fabulous. So let's add another layer in here. And so how do talent brands and employer brands differ from overall corporate brands?
I guess it's all about different audiences. So if you're the kind of company where the people you might employ are pretty similar to your customers, so perhaps you're a law firm, then there's not going to be a great deal of difference, because what you want to say to your customers is pretty close to what you want to say to the people you might hire. And indeed, they are the same kind of people. Whereas if you're, say, a toy manufacturer, your target audience might be an 8-year-old child, but that's probably not who you're hiring. And so suddenly you need to talk about some quite different things under your employer brand. So with some of the clients I work with, their employer brand is very, very close to their corporate brand, indeed. And for other clients, it might be a long way away and slightly more different.
Yeah. I know when, most people hear the word brand, they're usually thinking of a marketing ownership initiative. But who owns talent brand and employer brands? Is it both marketing or HR or, one or the other?
Every company organizes it differently. I've worked with some companies like Accenture, where they would have it very much within the marketing department. I've worked with an awful lot of companies where it isn't, and it sits usually within talent acquisition, but sometimes within HR. It sort of depends what you're going to do with it. So at some companies, it's used basically just for external recruitment, in which case probably talent acquisition are the right people to own it because they do that the most.
Mm-hmm.
But in other companies, they're also going to use it a lot to talk to the people who already work there, perhaps about culture change or behaviors or all sorts of things about how you're going to be as a company. And then quite often you'll find it's the chief people officer or the chief HR officer who says, no, this should very much be my thing because this is how we're going to communicate with the people who work here.
Suppose you've got an organization or a company today and they say, okay, we want to take a little bit more focus on building our talent and employer brands. What are the action steps? What do you recommend that they do?
I think there's a few things you need to go through. So back to that question I posed earlier, why should the people you want to work for you choose to work for you rather than anyone else? I think one of the first things you have to think about is, who do we actually want to work for us? Have we got a very good definition of that? If you try to be the best employer in the world to absolutely everybody, you're probably going to fail. And so quite often, one of the first steps you need to figure out is, who do we really need to connect with? What kinds of people do we want to come work here? What skills might they have? What personality do they have? And then you can start thinking about, what have we got to offer those people? And you can ask your own staff that question. Or alternatively, you can come and find someone like me who'll do it all for you. But there's no reason why you can't begin this project very much in-house.
Yeah. So I know building a brand is one thing, but what are some of the best practices for aligning recruiting strategies and tactics with the employer brand? The goal here, I think, is to build a consistent experience for candidates and employees, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the key to all branding, whether it's recruitment branding or consumer branding or even personal branding, is consistency and repetition. If every time I meet with you, I tell you I'm a bold, confident person, eventually you'll start to associate the words bold and confident with me. And it's kind of the same with you as an employer. If you think about all the things that someone might see along their way to joining you, they might originally see a social post, and then they see a job ad, and then they come to your website, and then they perhaps talk to a recruiter, and then they come in and have an interview with a line manager. If all of those people tell me very similar things about what's brilliant about working for you, I'm going to be more inclined to believe them than if each of those things tells me something different, even if they all told me something good. I might easily get confused about what you've really got on offer. Mm-hmm. Whereas if everyone's saying similar things, even if they phrase it differently, I'm going to start to believe in it more, and I'm going to have much more confidence about what it is that might make me leave my current job and come and work for you instead.
Yeah. And so as a firm really starts to focus on the talent and employer brands, what are the benefits that they're going to realize from these efforts?
There's a couple of obvious ways to look at this. I mean, the first thing is, if you do this really well, you should be able to hire better people quicker. And that's pretty attractive to any employer, is being able to find a better person faster is good news. But actually it also makes an awful lot of people's lives easier. There are so many people within your organization who might start from a blank piece of paper, perhaps that recruiter who has to write a job ad. It's a difficult thing to do if you're not sure where to start. But if you've got an employer brand, they've got a starting point. They know that they need to be talking about A, B, C, and D. But then again, later on, when, say, the hiring manager has to prepare for the interview with this candidate, they might just be sitting there going, well, what am I going to say to this candidate to persuade them to take this job rather than the other job that they're also interviewing for? Mm-hmm. If you've got an employer brand, you can hand that to them and say, hey, we've told them about A, B, C, and D. Why don't you tell them about the really specific version of A, B, C, and D in this office and in this role? And it makes life quicker and easier for them. So you'll find all the way along this chain, it makes things faster. If you then carry it through into an employment, you can also use it to train, say, line managers on what you should be talking about with your staff in an annual appraisal. There's all sorts of places you can use this to run the people side of your business more efficiently and more consistently. And it really is up to you how many places you can get around to implementing it. Don't feel bad if you haven't managed to do it everywhere, though, because it is a lot to take on.
So if it's done right, then the time frame that companies traditionally will spend recruiting actually will shorten, correct?
Completely. And if you're getting it right, you should find yourself doing less recruiting as well, because the people you're hiring understood what they were joining better and are making that move with more confidence. So they should hang around for longer and do better while they're there. So the implications of really getting this right are enormous. You're going to get better people who are quicker to getting up to effectiveness when they join. They're happier while they're there. They're more likely to bring friends with them. They're more likely to progress up into the management roles. It's quite profound, the impact of the better you can do this. So even quite small incremental changes could have a massive impact on your business.
Yeah. Can you give us some examples of organizations that you believe has really done well in this area and creating a compelling employer brand?
I think in some respects, the businesses that do this very well are often those where they can really look you in the eye and say people are our most important asset. So if you are a knowledge capital business like a law firm, an accountancy firm, the management consultancies, they don't own a lot of stuff. What they've got is people. And the difference between their people and their competitors' people is really what's going to differentiate them. So they tend to do this very well. And they allocate a lot of resource and time and energy into getting this right, into getting the big answer right, into getting all the little details right. So I'd say go and take a look at what some of them are doing, and you'll find that they tend to be doing it a lot better. I think that tends to happen less well at organizations where perhaps your leadership team are more thinking about product or IP or physical assets, inevitably distracts them from thinking about people as much. However, an awful lot of them are catching up very, very fast.
Yeah. So a company can take it on their own and do this in-house, but many organizations probably benefit from having a third-party outsourced team come in. For instance, ThirtyThree, that's one of your specialties there, is helping companies. Explain that difference and pros and cons here.
One of the things that is a big advantage for us, an unfair advantage, is that because we don't work for you, it's easier for us to look at you and go, wow, that's really different. That's the thing that we notice when we work with you, is the way you make decisions is completely different to the way our other clients make decisions, or the way you've decided to tackle diversity and inclusion is really unusual. We can see that because I'm working with 20, 40, 60 other clients at the same time. So it's really easy for me to spot what makes you, you, and what's interesting and what's different about that. And very often, if you've worked at a company for 20 years, even if you love it, it's very difficult for you to explain exactly why, because you don't have a good comparison point. Then also, there's obviously some niche bit of expertise that we're able to bring to the table. So we've got a big social media team who can get thinking very, very early on about what might you do with this down the line on social media, or we've got an in-house video production department who might be able to do that kind of thing that you're less likely to have in-house. So, there is an advantage to having an outside view, but sometimes you might just use part of their services. You might go, actually, we'll decide what the answer is, and then we'll use someone like ThirtyThree to create that video or to rebuild our website, or something where you actually need a skill that you don't have within your business.
So for, our HR pros out there and other audience members, what are some of the emerging trends and innovations that you see taking place with talent and employer branding? I have to feel that AI is actually going to have some impact into this space coming as we head into the future.
Is what everybody's been talking about at the big employer branding conferences is what's going to happen with AI. What I would say is less has happened than we expected it to. If you'd said to me a year ago, where do you think we'll be by the end of this year? I thought we'd be using more AI things already than is really proving to be the case. I think certainly the generative text engines do allow people who are not confident with writing to write better. So if you've got people in your team who have to write on behalf of your business, you can use the power of AI to improve them, or at least give them a head start on that thing that they were going to write. It's very good for doing that. And I think where things are proving more interesting and more difficult, but could be the bigger game changer in the long run, is your ability to talk to individuals individually. In theory, an AI could allow your business to communicate very differently with a senior hire to a junior hire, differently to someone who has skills and experience versus someone who's perhaps less qualified and is transferring across. In theory, these things, which at the moment take a lot of person time, could be resolved with some AI, but I've yet to see anybody successfully really implement that. I think when that happens, that will be a huge game changer, because it suddenly means your business can have this incredibly personalized relationship with an individual without needing thousands of people in your talent acquisition team.
Have you ever experienced starting to work with an organization and they just have difficulty really understanding, the approach that comes in, and how do you bring them to the table to make sure they recognize it?
There's always a challenge with every business I've worked with of making sure everybody in the business understands what we're doing and what we're not doing. And because there's quite a lot of stakeholders involved when you get into employer branding, because marketing will want to be involved, brand will want to be involved, HR, and indeed senior leadership very often. I did one recently with a client where the whole executive committee were involved, including and up to the CEO and the chairman and even one of the non-exec directors, because it was that important to their business. They were like, we all need to have this conversation about who we're going to be. But that involved quite a lot of education. It involved me being able to explain to those people very, very quickly, this is what we're doing and this is what it might achieve for your business. And this is the kind of stuff we're going to do with it 6 months down the line, a year down the line. This is where it might take you over the course of the next few years. And bringing those people with you was quite challenging versus a talent acquisition team who can very often see immediately how they're going to use this. It's much more obvious to them what this is going to do for the business and how this is going to make their life easy. But I find once people see the possibilities of it, they get very excited about it.
Yeah. I have to believe that an organization where you have CEO and senior leadership support, that's got to make it so much easier, because when they start looking at the talent and employer brand issue and making sure they get aligned, that's going to drive business.
Absolutely. And if the question of how are you seen as an employer isn't a CEO question, I don't know what is.
Right.
It's such a huge part of your reputation as a business, no matter what you do. And indeed, the amount of companies out there who use their staff in selling themselves to customers is enormous, whether that's a retailer saying, come and shop here because our staff are friendlier and more helpful, or whether it's a consultancy firm saying, use us because our people are smarter and better trained. Well, okay, that's intrinsically linked to what you're going to say in the job ads on the careers website. It makes sense for these senior stakeholders to have some involvement.
Yeah. Well, Marcus, before we sign off, I have a question that I'd like to ask you that I ask every guest that I have. And that is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background investigation on you, would there be any surprises?
Would there be any surprise? I think you'd probably find very quickly that I'm a terrible jazz trumpeter. So you'd find all sorts of gig listing in London pub while I'm playing in Jones bands. But I don't know that would be too much of a blocker for most employers. But
that's fabulous. That's fabulous. So I really appreciate your time today, Marcus, and all of the insights you've given us about this branding initiative. Where can our listeners keep up with you and ThirtyThree as far as that goes?
So first and foremost, do come and find me on LinkedIn. It's Marcus, Marcus, Body, Body, all as it sounds. I'm more than happy to have a chat with anybody who'd just like a second opinion, or search for ThirtyThree and employer branding. You'll very easily find our website and you can see some examples of what we do. And we recorded 10 episodes of a podcast called The Brand Plan, which gets a bit more into the detail of how you actually create one of these things, what you might do with it next. It's probably more for someone who's really about to embark on an employer branding project rather than someone who's just vaguely interested. But go and give that a listen if you want a bit more of the detail.
Well, fabulous. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to have a minute with Bill and Jim, my partners at S2 Verify. I know there's been discussion in the last 8 or 9 months with artificial intelligence. And why don't you give some insight about the limitations with that? Especially, I know that there are some federal agencies that have made some reference about that and how it could be utilized. You got any insight on that, Jim?
Well, Arnette, as you're aware, we currently deploy it. We deploy it with robotics and records. We also deploy it inside of the application now with how we term as grading, when a client has a set of criteria that determines how an individual is graded. Grading means how that crime's assessed. And we also use it on the compliance side in the platform for looking at very objective kind of rules that the AI works fine for. We aren't deploying it in the adjudication world. We haven't found, Billy can comment on this. The way that I would depict this quickest is the MVR world years and years ago, motor vehicle records, went to what was called a universal code. So one of the things that employers were frustrated by is if you pulled an MBR in Michigan and then pulled an MBR in Pennsylvania. They're both DUIs, but they have nothing to do with each other. And more importantly, they can say the same thing in different language. Driving while intoxicated, driving under the influence, etc. So the CRAs got together years ago, Equifax, a big driver in that process, of bringing a standard code so that what's a DUI in Nevada is a DUI in Illinois is a DUI in New York. Okay. This has been talked about over and over again in public records or criminal records of using AI to depict a universal process. The dilemma has to do with how many court jurisdictions, Billy?
3,100.
3,100 jurisdictions, probably. When you get into sub-courts, felony courts, and misdemeanor courts, probably doubling, tripling down on that. But the inability, Arnette, to cast a common thread through that court system where AI could be really beneficial because of the difference in language, statutes, for lack of a better term, the way a crime is depicted or defined is extremely challenging. Billy, I know you and I talked about this before. You want to add to it?
Yeah, I think, the biggest issue is we don't want to categorize individuals in crimes to some extent, because then you're basically going against what the EOC wants to do. And so we're individually looking at crimes, looking at, the background. We're calling the DOC, Department of Corrections, to see when they got out. So, you can't have an AI system that does those types of things. And so it's more investigative in the sense of, verifying the information versus going, oh, everybody with a felony, blah, 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 goes in this category. And so, I think there's going to be a lot of litigation around AI, because I think we have competitors out there that are using just strictly AI for adjudication, and they're missing records, or they're calling somebody that, doesn't have a criminal record. They're actually saying that they have a criminal record. So they're not going to the ThirtyThree to verify that information. So if you use broad brush, AI and categorization and everything else, and there's just a lot of innocent people that are being called felons or, showing up with a criminal record when it's not them.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our exploration of topics critical to success in HR. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America and England back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Thanks so much, Marcus. Appreciate you joining.
Pleasure.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.